My parents viewed me solely as a labor source, and when I established my own sports store, they sought to seize it. My father, wielding a bat from my store, then filed a lawsuit. I have never before shared this experience, but after reading numerous posts here, I believe it's time. It's not easy to articulate the hardships I've endured, but perhaps expressing them will aid my progress. So here's my story. I was raised in a family that appeared to be typical from the outside. We lived in a comfortable home. My parents were employed, and there was no indication that anything was amiss. However, behind closed doors, life was far from ideal. My parents did not view me as their child. Rather, they regarded me as free labor. From a young age, I was treated as if I existed solely to serve them. My father, James, was a hard man, descended from a lineage of farmers who held the belief that hard work was paramount and that emotions were for the weak. My mother, Sandra, shared his perspective, standing by him and supporting every decision he made. She was not physically abusive, but her complicity in his actions was just as damaging. She failed to protect me from his influence, and in some ways, her indifference was even more detrimental than the physical abuse. I am not sure if beating is the correct term to describe it, though. It was not like the movies where the abuser is just an angry man swinging a belt around. No, it was more insidious than that. My father's actions were not driven by anger, but by a desire to exert control over me, to break me down and mold me into the person he envisioned, ensuring that I did not exercise independent thought. The overarching goal was to maintain control and establish my place in the family hierarchy. From the age of 6, I was engaged in agricultural labor, including planting, harvesting, and animal care, while other children were engaged in leisure activities. I was constantly immersed in the dirt, and any mistakes or reluctance to work were met with severe punishment. I was never afforded the opportunity to be a child. I recall a particularly hot summer day when I was 9 years old. The sun felt oppressive, and after working since sunrise, I collapsed in the dirt, gasping for air, feeling as though my skin was melting. Instead of providing me with rest or water, my father grabbed me by the collar and dragged me to the barn, his voice cold and firm, saying, "You don't stop when you're tired. You stop when I say you're done." This incident marked the realization that to my parents, I was not a son or a person, but merely a tool they could utilize. It was not just my father. My mother also showed no concern, merely handing me a rag and instructing me to clean myself up as if it were a normal occurrence. Her eyes, filled with apathy, conveyed that I was nothing more than an annoyance to her, and she promptly returned to her chores or her gossip phone calls with her church friends. School was the only thing that saved me. It was like stepping into a different world, one where I wasn't being yelled at or hit. I wasn't treated like garbage. I was just me. I could breathe. The teachers didn't know what was happening at home, and I never said a word. What was the point? But in that space, I could pretend I could focus on the subjects I loved, particularly literature and history, and for a few hours a day, I could disappear into the stories of people who lived lives so different from mine. The first book that profoundly impacted me was The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. I have read it over 100 times, particularly the sections where Ponyboy expresses his sense of not belonging. This resonated with my own feelings of isolation. My friends couldn't understand, and why would they? Their parents were always present at school events, greeting them with hugs and declarations of love. I had never experienced such warmth. However, within the pages of that book, I found someone who felt lost like I did, which made me feel less alone. By the time I reached high school, I had honed my skills in concealing my true self. I excelled at portraying a facade of normalcy, even cultivating a few close friends, Tom, Lisa, and Marcus. We met in our freshman year and formed an instant bond. It was the first time I felt a sense of belonging. Tom was the humorous one, always lifting spirits with his jokes. Lisa was the intellectual of the group, destined for great achievements. Marcus acted as the unifying force, holding us together. They were unaware of my tumultuous home life. I never disclosed it and they never probed. I would invent excuses to avoid social engagements after school, claiming excessive homework or strict parental supervision. The reality was that my father forbade me from engaging in any extracurricular activities unrelated to work. If I wasn't in class, I was expected to contribute to the farm. However, even amidst these constraints, school provided an escape for me. I threw myself into my studies, determined to one day escape that oppressive environment. College became my sole objective, my only escape. I dedicated myself to hard work, secured scholarships, and when the time came, I was accepted into a university 3 hours away. It felt like a miracle. I vividly recall the day I received my acceptance letter. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope, fearing another rejection. However, upon seeing the words, "Congratulations," I nearly wept. Almost. I couldn't allow myself to become overly emotional. I had learned long ago that emotions were dangerous, making one vulnerable and thus a weakness. Nonetheless, for the first time in my life, I felt a glimmer of hope. Upon informing my parents of my intention to attend college, my father merely grunted, his gaze fixed on the television. My mother remained silent, indifferent to my departure. To them, it was merely one less mouth to feed and one less body to exploit for labor. I packed my belongings and left without uttering a single goodbye, not even glancing back. College was everything I had hoped it would be. It was the first time I was truly free, the first time I could breathe without feeling like I was suffocating. I met people who actually cared about me, real friends who weren't afraid to show emotion, who didn't judge me for being quiet or distant. Sometimes, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was allowed to be myself. Tom, Lisa, and Marcus all attended the same university and eventually moved into an off-campus apartment together. It was an escape from our pasts, and the city was full of opportunities. We were ready to take on the world. However, as we all know, nothing ever goes as planned. The initial months were fantastic. We celebrated, studied, and explored the city, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps things could be different and that happiness was within reach. However, the tide began to turn. Tom found himself in a group of individuals more focused on partying than academic pursuits. Lisa, who had always been responsible, began dating a controlling and toxic individual. Marcus, the only one who appeared stable, was grappling with severe depression, a topic he seldom discussed. One night, everything changed. We were all at a party celebrating the end of exams. It was a typical college scene, loud music, too much alcohol, and people everywhere. I wasn't really feeling it though. I never liked big crowds, and the noise was getting to me. I decided to leave early, thinking I would just walk back to the apartment and crash for the night. On the way back, I got a call from Marcus. He sounded off like he'd been drinking too much. I could hear the pain in his voice, the kind that only comes when someone's been carrying too much for too long. He told me he was at the apartment and needed to talk. I was aware that something was amiss, but I had not fully grasped the severity of the situation. Upon entering the apartment, I discovered the door unlocked. I called out for Marcus, but there was no response. I found him in his room, sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. An empty bottle of whiskey was beside him, and his hands were trembling. He looked up at me, his eyes devoid of life, and said, "I can't do this anymore." That's when I noticed the pills. There was a half-empty bottle on the nightstand, and my heart sank. I rushed to his side, attempting to reassure him that things would improve and that he was not alone. However, he remained skeptical, expressing his exhaustion and inability to continue the struggle. The duration of our interaction felt like an eternity, and I was petrified that he might act impulsively, leaving me powerless to intervene. Despite my pleas for him to allow me to seek assistance, he steadfastly refused, warning me that he would vanish before help could arrive. Eventually, I managed to persuade him to hand over the pills. He was too drunk to resist and too broken to care. I stayed with him throughout the night, ensuring his safety and confirming his breathing. By morning, he had passed out, and I finally contacted Lisa and Tom, informing them of the situation. That was the beginning of the end for us. Marcus dropped out of school a few weeks later, citing the need to return home to escape the city's pressures. Lisa remained with her toxic boyfriend, isolating herself from the rest of us. Tom continued down his self-destructive path, partying harder, drinking more, and eventually failing out of school. And me? I stayed. I kept pushing forward, determined not to let my past or my friends' choices define me. I had spent my whole life trying to escape the chains of my childhood, and I wasn't about to let them drag me down again. However, even as I sit here writing this, I am uncertain if I will ever truly be free. The scars of my past are deeply ingrained, and no matter how far I run, they persist just beneath the surface. This is why I am writing this. I believed that leaving home would mark the end of my troubles, but I am beginning to understand that it may just be the start. Apologies for the lengthy post, but I felt compelled to express everything. If anyone has advice on how to proceed or cope with the overwhelming emotions, I am eager to hear it. Greetings to everyone, it is I once more. I did not anticipate returning so soon, but after my previous post, I realized there is still much to be processed. The process of writing it all out has been therapeutic, but this second part of the story is not solely about pain. It is also about finding hope, rebuilding what was lost, and potentially emerging stronger than before. However, life is rarely smooth, and after Marcus dropped out of school and left the city, our group of four, once so close, began to unravel rapidly. Lisa remained trapped in her toxic relationship, while Tom's self-destructive behaviors intensified. I felt lost, unsure of how to fix everything. I mean, how do you help people when you're barely holding yourself together? I thought back to those days growing up, back when my parents didn't see me as anything more than a tool to be used. There was a part of me that had always been scared I'd fall apart like my friends were doing. I guess that fear had kept me on track all these years, pushing me to stay focused on my goals even when everything else was falling apart. But now I realized that fear couldn't control me anymore. I had to be the one to take control, not just of my own life, but maybe even help my friends do the same. The initial step was Marcus. Following his departure from the city, we did not communicate for a period. I wanted to provide him with space, yet simultaneously harbored concerns for his well-being. I understood that his depression would not vanish merely by leaving. Consequently, I decided to call him, anticipating another voicemail, but to my surprise, he answered. His voice was hoarse, suggesting days of little sleep. I could sense his struggle in his tone. He remained in a dark place, and it was visibly affecting him. Our conversation was brief, mostly consisting of idle chatter. I refrained from pressing too hard, but I made it clear that I was there for him. Over the subsequent weeks, our conversations deepened, and he gradually opened up. He shared that he had been seeing a therapist in his hometown, attempting to navigate the complexities within his mind. I was relieved. It was a small step, but a step nonetheless. I encouraged him to persist, to not surrender even when it seemed impossible. We made a pact. He would continue attending therapy, and I would check in with him every week. We were no longer just friends. We were brothers, united in our struggle, and now striving to find the light. After a few months, Marcus called me one night with a surprise. He expressed his desire to return, indicating that he was not ready to abandon his aspirations and did not wish to remain indefinitely in his parents' home. This marked a pivotal moment for him, evident in his determined tone. Consequently, a few weeks later, he packed his belongings and relocated back to the city. We assisted him in securing a new apartment close to mine, and gradually, Marcus began to reconstruct his life. Conversely, Tom's situation was markedly different. While Marcus's struggles were largely internal, Tom's were visible on the surface. His drinking, late-night parties, and reckless behavior were spiraling out of control, and I knew that if something didn't change, he was going to hit rock bottom hard. I recall the night I decided to confront him. We were sitting in our living room, the air thick with tension. He had just returned from another party, drunk out of his mind, and collapsed on the couch. I sat down across from him, uncertain of how to begin. It wasn't as simple as telling him to stop, but I had to try. I approached Tom quietly, attempting to meet his bloodshot eyes. "This isn't you, man," I said. At first, he dismissed me with a wave, muttering that I didn't understand. However, I understood. I had witnessed the devastation of addiction firsthand, as my father had drowned himself in alcohol for years. I was not going to stand by and watch my best friend follow the same path. During the subsequent weeks, I endeavored to support Tom as best I could. Despite his reluctance, I persisted, even facing his anger and insults when I was trying to help. Deep down, I knew he wasn't angry at me, but rather at himself and his life. I convinced him to attend a meeting, just one, to see if it might be beneficial. Initially resistant, he eventually agreed. That meeting proved to be a turning point. Slowly but surely, Tom began to reduce his alcohol consumption. He discovered a community of individuals who had experienced similar struggles, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel so isolated. Although the battle continued daily, he was now fighting with a newfound sense of camaraderie and support. Lisa's struggle with her toxic relationship with Nick was particularly challenging. Nick had been exerting a negative influence over her for over a year. I witnessed his manipulative tactics, which included isolating her from her friends and diminishing her self-worth until she believed she was worthless without him. It infuriated me, but what could I do? She was not yet ready to see the truth, still ensnared in the vicious cycle of believing his lies and his false declarations of love, despite his mistreatment of her. It wasn't until one night after a particularly brutal argument with Nick that Lisa showed up at my apartment, sobbing and broken. She'd had enough. Finally, she couldn't take the abuse anymore, and she didn't know where else to turn. I listened as she poured everything out, the constant fights, the manipulation, the way he made her feel like she wasn't worth anything. In that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her go back to him, not this time. I let her crash on my couch for a few days, giving her the space she needed to clear her head. Marcus and Tom also visited to offer their support. They reminded her of her former self, the strong and confident Lisa who never tolerated disrespect. It took time, but eventually, she began to believe in herself again. Breaking free from Nick was not an easy task. One night, he appeared at her apartment, pounding on the door and insisting on speaking with her. The fear and defiance in her eyes were unforgettable. She was determined not to allow him to exert control over her again. That was when I realized she had rediscovered her strength. With our assistance, Lisa moved out of the apartment she shared with Nick and found a new place. She changed her phone number, blocked him on all platforms, and began rebuilding her life piece by piece. She returned to school, refocused on her studies, and rediscovered herself. It was a long journey, but each day she grew a little stronger. As these events unfolded, I began to forge my own path. My enduring passion for fitness and sports, which provided a means to cope with the hardships of my upbringing, was a significant factor. Exercise became a therapeutic outlet, allowing me to channel my anger and frustration into productive activities. Consequently, when the opportunity to start my own business presented itself, I seized it with enthusiasm. It began as a mere idea, stemming from my experience working at a local gym, where I assisted with training sessions and gained insight into the fitness industry. However, I harbored a desire for more than just a job. I aspired to create something of my own, rather than working for someone else indefinitely. So, I took a leap of faith and opened a small shop specializing in sports equipment. Initially, it was a modest storefront, devoid of extravagance. I invested the majority of my savings to stock the shop with high-quality gear, ranging from running shoes to weightlifting equipment. Despite my nerves, I was driven by determination. My entire life had been dedicated to achieving something better, and this was my opportunity to make it a reality. An incredible transformation occurred. The shop experienced rapid growth, initially attracting a few loyal customers, including individuals I had met at the gym and friends who supported me. The word quickly spread, leading to an influx of customers eager to purchase the high-quality gear I was selling. While the products were exceptional, I believe the key to our success was the way we treated our customers. I had founded the business on the principle that everyone deserved to feel empowered and capable of taking control of their health and fitness, regardless of their starting point. This message resonated with many. Before long, I found myself needing to hire additional staff to meet the growing demand. Initially, we had a small team of just a few employees to manage the shop, but it wasn't long before we began expanding. We recruited a team of trainers, nutritionists, and even local athletes to help build our brand. We started offering classes and workshops, fostering a community around the store. It wasn't just about selling equipment, it was about empowering people to transform their lives. As the business expanded, so did the pressure. I was working long hours, managing everything from inventory to marketing to customer service. There were days when I felt overwhelmed, but I couldn't afford to fail. Not after everything I'd been through. Not after coming this far. One day, we encountered an issue with a supplier. Without delving into specifics, suffice it to say that they attempted to deceive us by delivering inferior products at exorbitant prices. When I confronted them, they threatened to sever our relationship, leaving us without a significant portion of our inventory. The prospect of failing our customers was terrifying. However, instead of yielding, I chose to fight back. I sought out new suppliers, established new relationships, and emerged stronger. This experience was a tough lesson in business, but it only fueled my determination to succeed. Then came the day we were robbed. I'll never forget walking into the store one morning to find the front window shattered, the shelves scripted. It felt like everything I had worked for was crumbling right in front of me, but instead of giving up, I picked up the pieces, literally with the help of my friends and my new team. We rebuilt. We installed security cameras, tightened up our operations, and came back stronger than ever. Ultimately, what began as a modest sports equipment shop evolved into something far greater than I could have ever envisioned. We were not merely a business. We were a family, comprising the individuals I worked with and the customers who frequented our store. They became integral to something extraordinary. We were united in our efforts to improve, to grow, and to overcome any obstacles life presented. Throughout this journey, my friends Marcus, Tom, and Lisa remained steadfast by my side. Each of them faced their own struggles and challenges, but we navigated them together. We had endured the most difficult times, and now we were constructing something beautiful from the remnants. Reflecting on my journey, it is difficult to comprehend the transformation from a farm-raised child treated as mere labor to the individual I am today, a business owner, a friend, and someone who has finally grasped the essence of freedom. Essentially, I am conveying that no matter how bleak the situation appears, there is always a path to escape. There is always hope, even when it seems like everything is crumbling. It will not be easy, nor will it occur instantaneously, but if one persists and continues to fight, they will eventually find their way. Greetings to everyone. I did not anticipate returning so soon, but I felt compelled to share. My life has taken an unforeseen turn, and I am still processing the events. What began as my quest to break free from my past has unexpectedly come full circle in the most unexpected and convoluted manner. Following the establishment of the store, everything was going well. We had built something from the ground up, and my friends and I were closer than ever. Marcus had recovered, Tom had reorganized his life, and Lisa was thriving, free from her toxic relationship. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was really moving forward, like I had left my past behind for good. However, my parents arrived unexpectedly. I had not communicated with them since my departure for college, and despite occasional messages from my mother, I chose to ignore them. I harbored no desire to revisit that aspect of my life. They had shown little interest in me during my childhood, so why would they care now? But it seemed they had been monitoring my progress, and upon learning of my store's success, they decided to make an appearance. It was a Wednesday afternoon, immediately following the lunch rush. The store was bustling with customers, and I was in the back office reviewing inventory when I heard someone pounding on the door. My employee, Jamie, cautiously poked her head in, appearing visibly uneasy. A man and a woman were standing outside my store, politely requesting my attention. I recognized them immediately upon stepping out. Indeed, there they were, James and Sandra, standing in the middle of my store, as if they owned it. My father wore his usual scowl, arms crossed over his chest, while my mother stood behind him, appearing as though she would rather be elsewhere. I paused for a moment, taking them in. They hadn't altered much. My father still exuded authority, as if he expected everyone around him to conform to his will. My mother remained passive, her eyes darting nervously around as if she feared being observed and judged. I approached them, attempting to maintain composure despite my racing heart, as I asked, "What are you doing here?" I asked, maintaining a composed tone. My father sneered. "That's how you greet your parents after all these years? No wonder you turned out to be such a disappointment." I felt my anger rising, but I held it back. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of getting under my skin. I asked again, this time with a bit more force. "What do you want?" My mother interjected, her voice softer than I remembered. "You've done well for yourself, and we thought it was time to reconnect." I could see right through her fake concern. Reconnect. They hadn't cared about me when I was growing up. Now, they wanted to play the part of loving parents. It was laughable. "We don't need to reconnect," I said flatly. "Whatever this is about, just say it." My father stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You owe us," I blinked. "Excuse me, you heard me," he growled. "You wouldn't have any of this if it weren't for the years of hard work we put into raising you. All those years you worked on the farm. Who do you think gave you that discipline, that strength? It was us. You'd be nothing without us." I felt my blood boiling. This was insane. They had treated me like a slave, not a son, and now they were trying to take credit for everything I had built. "You didn't give me anything," I said, my voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "You used me, you abused me, I got out to spite you, not because of you." That's when my father lost it. "You ungrateful little bastard," he shouted, his face turning red. "We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us?" Before I could react, he turned and grabbed a baseball bat from one of the displays. My heart stopped. I had put that display together with my own hands, never imagining it would be used for something like this. He swung the bat at me, and I barely had time to dodge out of the way. The bat hit the counter with a loud crack, sending products flying everywhere. Customers screamed and ran for cover as chaos erupted in the store. My father's assault continued, his swings becoming more erratic. The bat struck my shoulder, causing a sharp pain to radiate down my arm. I stumbled backward, attempting to create distance, but he persisted. "Do you think you can walk away from us? Do you think you can turn your back on your family?" he screamed, his voice escalating with each word. My mother, standing to the side, wrung her hands in distress, but failed to intervene. She had always been passive, watching as her husband attempted to physically harm their son. Fortunately, Jamie and a few other employees had called the police immediately upon the onset of the chaos. The sound of sirens outside was enough to make my father pause, but not before he landed another blow to my ribs. I fell to the ground, gasping for air, but I was determined not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Within moments, the police burst through the door, guns drawn. They tackled my father to the ground, pinning him down as he continued to scream obscenities. My mother, who had finally come to her senses, tried to plead with the officers, but they weren't having it. They slapped the cuffs on both of them and hauled them away. I sat on the floor of my store, clutching my side and trying to comprehend the events that had transpired. The physical pain was excruciating, but it paled in comparison to the emotional turmoil I was experiencing. After years of struggling to escape my past, it had resurfaced in the most violent manner imaginable. As my friends helped me to my feet, I realized that this was far from the end. My parents, being the delusional people they were, decided to sue me. Yes, you read that right. They sued me for emotional damages and claimed they were entitled to a portion of my business because, according to them, I owed them for raising me. The whole thing was absurd, but I knew it wasn't just about the money for them. It was about control. It always had been. The lawsuit endured for months, marking one of the most challenging periods of my life. Each day, I was forced to revisit the trauma of my childhood as my parents attempted to portray themselves as victims. They dredged up memories from my time on the farm and the discipline they imposed. It was nauseating, but I was not alone. My friends, Marcus, Tom, and Lisa, were steadfast in their support, accompanying me to every court appearance, every meeting with my lawyer, and every late-night breakdown when I felt overwhelmed. Without their unwavering support, I am not sure what I would have done. The trial was a brutal experience. My father, a master manipulator, attempted to portray himself as a wounded patriarch, insisting that his sole desire was for my success. My mother, as usual, supported him, occasionally wiping away fake tears as she recited her rehearsed lines about the sacrifices they had made for me. However, the truth emerged. My lawyer, a formidable woman named Rachel, who was not afraid to confront anyone, dismantled their arguments. She highlighted the years of abuse, the forced labor on the farm, and the way they treated me, like nothing more than a tool. She painted a clear picture of who my parents truly were. By the time she finished, there wasn't a single person in that courtroom who believed their lies. The jury ruled in my favor, dismissing my parents' case. Not only did they lose, but they were also hit with counterclaims that left them in serious debt. The judge was appalled by their behavior and ordered them to pay restitution for the damages they had caused in the store. But the real kicker came when the judge ordered them to serve 3 months of correctional labor. It was poetic justice. The situation became intriguing when they were assigned to work on a farm, specifically my family's farm, where I had previously labored under the scorching sun for years, enduring conditions akin to slavery. They were subjected to the same rigorous work without any exceptions or special treatment. It was gratifying to observe them struggle with the same tasks they had imposed on me for years, providing a sense of closure. For the first time in my life, I found myself in a position of power. I did not gloat or taunt them, nor did I rub it in their faces. That is not who I am. However, I ensured they comprehended the gravity of their actions. I made them feel the full extent of their wrongdoing. They had always believed that hard labor was the only means to instill discipline, so I subjected them to the same treatment. They shoveled manure, hauled hay, and worked until their hands were blistered and raw. Just like they had done to me, I stood by and watched, ensuring they did not cease until the task was completed. Initially, they expressed resistance, arguing that the task was too challenging and that their age made it unsuitable for them. However, the court and the law were indifferent to their complaints. They had chosen this path, and now they were compelled to face the repercussions. The physical strain was one thing, but it was the psychological burden that truly took its toll. My father, who had always been strong and authoritative, began to show signs of vulnerability. The man who once commanded the farm with an iron grip was now an exhausted figure, struggling to maintain his former strength. My mother, accustomed to standing in the background, was now forced to confront the consequences of their actions. There were moments when I almost felt sorry for them, but then I'd remember the years of abuse, the years of being treated like nothing more than a tool for their benefit, and the sympathy would fade. They had earned every blister, every ache, every moment of exhaustion. This was justice. By the time their 3-month sentence was over, they had transformed into mere shadows of their former selves, devoid of arrogance and entitlement. During that time, they communicated with me sparingly, using terse, abrupt sentences. There was no acknowledgement of their actions, no expression of regret. I did not anticipate an apology, as individuals like them do not undergo sudden epiphanies. However, I had already moved on from the incident. Upon the completion of their sentence, they departed from the farm, and I neither bid them farewell nor have I heard from them since. They have become mere ghosts from my past, serving as reminders of a life I have left behind. The farm is now legally mine. Following the trial, I was awarded the property. While a part of me considered destroying it, I ultimately decided to retain it. It is no longer a farm in the traditional sense. Instead, I have transformed it into a retreat, a sanctuary where individuals can seek solace, find peace, and heal. It is ironic that the place that once served as my prison has become a refuge for others. My life has undergone transformations that I could never have anticipated. The store is thriving, the farm is a success, and my friendships have grown stronger than ever. We've all endured our own trials, but we emerged from them more resilient. For me, I finally feel free. Although I still reflect on my parents and the hardships they subjected me to, Those memories no longer exert the same influence over me. I have reclaimed control of my life and am living it on my own terms for the first time. So, if there's one lesson I've learned through all of this, it's that no matter how deep the scars run, no matter how heavy the weight of your past may be, you can still rise above it. You can still find freedom even when it seems impossible.